Hello, everyone. My name is Milo Cook, and I am the Executive Director here at Shadhika. I'm thrilled to take this opportunity to share with you our 2020-2021 annual report and the inspiring stories of the partners and scholars in India. As you know, 2020 took the world by storm and brought so many of us to our knees. The loss is still being accounted for and is likely to take several generations to overcome. Over the last few months, we have watched the pandemic take new proportions of devastation in India and now in the US. At Shadhika, the last year has been a year of transition, a year of learning, but also a year of hope. And here are some of the numbers to tell our stories. First, to give you a bit of a context of what we're looking at in India. 10 million is the estimated number of girls at risk of dropping out of school in India at the moment. Among them, 3 million are at risk of never returning to school because of child marriage, work outside and inside the home, unwanted pregnancies, malnutrition, and a lack of access to technology. Unfortunately, we've seen an increase in child marriage, which is harder to detect now by law enforcement because the social distancing guidelines forbid gatherings. So weddings are not taking place in the same way that they used to. And the economic impact of the pandemic has led families to accepting to marry their daughters off without a dowry right away. All of these things are making forced marriage and child marriage more of a covert occurrence that is very hard for community members and law enforcement to keep track of. We've also seen an increase in malnutrition of girls. Midday meal, a national school lunch program in India, had contributed over the last few years to increase girl enrollment in school. Now, girls once again are at risk of starvation and the health risk associated with poor nutrition, all of which may have long term effects on their health and their education. Additionally, we have observed a lapse in learning habits. Educators all over India believe that it is critical, even if academic curriculum is not being taught right now, that some basic learning habits continue, like keeping a daily schedule for studies, carving out time away from household chores to do homework, keeping up with the discipline to repeat learning concepts, etc. And unfortunately, all of those concepts are falling to the wayside. There is a real gender technology gap in India. Roughly 20% of women are estimated to use the internet in India versus 41% of men who have access and use the internet. With COVID, household chores and childcare falling on women and girls, we're likely to see access to remote learning and being able to get back into a learning routine to be much more difficult for girls than it is for boys. Education gaps related to the caste system, to religious and ethnic minorities, gender, and other underrepresented identities are only widening, with children of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and Muslim communities twice as likely to stay out of school. For instance, 15% of students in the slums of Delhi right now are unaccounted for by teachers. Many estimate that in India, the higher education system is being gutted by the human loss related to the pandemic. Teachers are looking for new jobs because schools are being closed and they don't have all the sources of income, but also because safety guidelines are lacking and they do not feel safe going back into the classroom in person. And overall, there is a real lack of training and infrastructure to support online and remote learning, leaving teachers in despair and with no other recourse than looking for other careers. Schools around the country started to reopen in January of 2021, when India seemed to be an example for the world of how to flatten the curve. Then March brought on a second surge that took a greater toll on the population than in 2020. Now 1.5 million schools have been closed on and off, affecting nearly 300 million school-aged children in India. Schools for older age students are just starting to reopen slowly, and yet many parents continue to be skeptical to send their kids back to school. And education advocates are pushing for the Indian government to adopt a gendered approach that will consider the special needs of girls and LGBTQ students to be able to start school again safely. In the midst of all of this, here at Shadhika, as you can imagine, it's been a trying time. We have tried to think critically on our feet, to be responsive and as supportive as possible for a world away. And so here are a few actions that we've taken in 2020 and in the first half of 2021. First, last year, we unrestricted 100% of our program support funding to give local leadership the flexibility they needed to respond to the unique needs of their communities. Likewise, this year, in our new round of grants for 2021 and 2022, we wrote in our grant agreements the authority for the local partners to reallocate 50% of their grant money without prior approval from Shadhika. We will continue to monitor the situation in India closely and may increase that percentage as needed, as we did in 2020. Second, during the second surge of the pandemic in India in this past spring, Shadhika raised enough emergency funding to send 2,500 in rapid response grants to all of our partners. This is unrestricted money for the partners and to support them in their local response. Some of our partners bought more mobile devices to conduct their programming virtually. Some paid for rent and for staff to retain and sustain their infrastructure for an effective recovery. Some paid for external consultants to come in and help them navigate these uncertain waters. Again, we've given the freedom for the partners to take liberty with these emergency funds and use them as most appropriate for their unique needs. Third, Shadhika adopted an open payment schedule for the scholarship funds in 2020 to allow scholars to start school as late as December of 2020. And in May and June of this year, we streamlined our due diligence to get the funds as quickly as possible to all renewing scholars. When there's so much uncertainty, when the economic fallout of the pandemic is at such a scale, we know that when families go hungry, it is sometimes easier to marry off their daughters, or sometimes worse. Having money in their hands will allow scholars to continue to advocate for themselves and to stave off potential threat to their education until school can resume. Fourth, with the help of one generous donor, Shadhika rose to the occasion and was able to approve more scholarship applicants than expected. And we now have a cohort of a total of 70 scholars, 21 more than last year, the most we've ever had here at Shadhika. Because we know that families are in a more dire position than they've ever been, and may not be able to send girls and young women to school during the pandemic. And so it was so important for us to be able to meet the demands for scholarship funding this year. Finally, in 2021, all of those 70 scholars will receive a full technology package that includes not just a computer, but computer classes and connectivity costs, because we want to make sure that not only will they know how to use their computers optimally, but they will actually be able to access a strong internet connection to be able to take part in remote learning and access virtual resources. As you can see, it took resolve, it took focus, it took innovation, and it took trust for staff and board to stay the course and overcome these challenges. But we're not shy to share with you the result of these changes. The activities Shadhika supported in 2020 reached over 4,000 girls and nearly 3,500 boys, which is more than in 2019 prior to the pandemic. We are so proud of the fact that 90% of the girls involved in the program supported by our Support for Success funds completed high school. This is due to the effort of our partners to resume programming virtually, to provide emergency material relief where it was needed, and to conduct welfare checks during the distribution of material packages. Early studies are finding that the latter two played a huge factor in contributing to the safety and security of girls at home, but also to girls staying in school during the pandemic. We're also happy to report that 100% of Shadhika scholars graduated from college in 2020. They have been able to rely on computers provided by Shadhika to attend remote learning safely. Also, knowing that Shadhika was committed to disperse their scholarship grants, regardless of when they would start school, gave the young women ammunition that they needed to advocate for themselves and believe in themselves during a time of great uncertainty. Some of our scholars moved back to their rural villages during the pandemic, but the majority of them either negotiated their way to return to the city to continue their studies or have found a way to access their classes online. 100% of scholars have stayed in school. Many reported that the support they felt from Shadhika, but also from each other, played a huge factor in them having the courage and the resilience to get through a really tough year. During the pandemic, as we all did, scholars felt isolated and alone. But the strong peer network the scholars created amongst themselves gave them an instant group who could listen to each other, lift each other up during the hardest days, and troubleshoot the complexities of remote learning and college administration during the pandemic. The scholars who supported each other during the numerous lockdowns have reported that many of their friends, their peers, didn't have the same level of support and couldn't overcome the challenges of the pandemic, resorting to accepting forced marriage or taking part in other risky behaviors that put in jeopardy their education. A few scholars got married during the pandemic, but fortunately they stayed in school because, once again, with the help of the scholarship funds, they are now worth more educated to their in-laws than uneducated and staying at home. Finally, in our Dawn pilot project that aims to enlist men and boys to champion the fight against gender-based violence in Uttar Pradesh, 68% of women and girls in the target villages reported feeling safer at home, even despite the reports of domestic violence having exploded during the pandemic. This is no small feat. We know, thanks to the data coming out of the National Commission for Human Rights in India, that there was a 400% increase in incident reports involving domestic violence in the early months of the pandemic. This confirms to us at Shadhika what we already know from the epidemics like Zika and Ebola, that providing material support and doing welfare checks are the best gender advancing work we can invest in when women and girls are isolated at home and the general population is suffering. This was entirely guided by our local partners, and we're glad to have contributed, even in a small way, to their ability to pivot in their communities to work in this way. All of this was possible with the financial support of just over 500 unique donors just like you. In a hard year of transition, we have welcomed new faces on staff and on the board to take up the torch and fight the good fight alongside the young women in India. We have renewed energy and continue to draw inspiration from the partners and the scholars who get up every day to pursue their dreams. So I invite you to read through the pages of the report. I hope you are inspired just like we are. And please use the QR codes in the report to listen to more stories from the field. Once again, thank you for continuing to believe in our mission and for your ongoing support. It has meant the world to all of us here at Shadhika. These stories of success are as much yours as they are ours to celebrate.